What's going on, sports fans? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over the hardest 5 teams that you can rebuild in College Football 25 Dynasty. Now these are all going to be 1-star programs that I looked. There's a website that you can find online that I found on Reddit where you can go through the star rating of each team and what their offense and defensive rating is. Now let's not waste any more time. I like to keep these videos a little bit shorter. Let's get right into it. At number 5, we got a team out of the Conference USA, which is going to be New Mexico State. Now I know I could have gone with some other options here. I think it was between them and either James Madison or some other 1-star, but the other 1-star had higher offensive rating. Now I think there are 11 teams-ish that are 1-star ratings, and so I had to choose between those, but I decided to go with the 5 hardest because I feel like those are the ones that people like to do more. They like to start at the hardest possible challenge for themselves, and if, hey, you like these teams, then that's nice for them. Now, the real issues I see with New Mexico State is that their offensive rating is only like a 74, which is really not good, and the conference they're in, everyone else is going to be a little bit better than them, except for Kennesaw State. Now, one of the things that makes this a little bit easier than others, as I'm looking at the conference, there's a bunch of teams on here like Sam Houston State, Kennesaw State, Jacksonville State, which are really just not good teams. I feel like this is an easy conference that's out in the open for everyone, aside for teams like Middle Tennessee State and UTEP and Western Kentucky, which are all teams that have had solid seasons within the last couple of years. Now, Liberty will probably win the conference, so they're the team that seems to be like they have at least an NFL prospect at quarterback, or at least somebody good on the team every single year. But New Mexico State, I don't really see them recruiting against anybody too difficult, especially like proximity to home. It seems like not a lot is out there by New Mexico. I mean, maybe you're losing some prospects at Texas, maybe you're losing some to Oklahoma, but other than that, it seems like if you got a kid in New Mexico, they're probably going to either come to you or the number 4 team on this list, which is just going to be New Mexico. Now, I have New Mexico on this list because I feel like they're in a tougher conference in the Mountain West. Now, the Mountain West might not be overall as good as the Conference USA, but I don't really think either of the conferences are really that good anyway. There are some teams in here that have had NFL prospects like Utah State, Wyoming, and of course Boise State, which always has a solid team. Fresno State, even with a couple solid seasons, especially if Mikey Keene's still their quarterback this year. It seems like some of the same issues here. There's just not a lot going on in New Mexico, and apparently the conference they're in is probably a little bit better than the last one. I'd put New Mexico at 4 because, again, they're a little bit lower rating than New Mexico State, which is going to make it a little bit tougher, and I think their conference alone is tougher itself. So that'll make this a little bit harder to do than New Mexico State, especially since these two teams are going to be battling back and forth with a rivalry, trying to figure out which one's going to get this recruit, and maybe winner of that game claims the best players. Those are just some of the challenges I see for New Mexico, as well as losing some of the recruits again to the Texases and the Georgias. Some of the Big 12 or even the SEC schools will take some recruits from them. Now, the third team I have in here for the third toughest team to rebuild is going to be Old Dominion. Not a lot going for them as well. They're one of the worst teams again in the game. I think they're literally third worst by rating. And in a conference that still has divisions, it looks like, with a lot of teams in here that could be taking away some recruits. Texas State is in a big market being in Texas. ULM being in a big market in Louisiana where they have to go up against LSU. James Madison is coming on. Marshall always seems to be a little bit solid. Appalachian State always seems to be good. And Coastal Carolina seems to have a couple good years every once in a while, especially recently. Now, I see this being a little bit of a tougher rebuild because, again, they do have divisions, it seems like right now, which is going to make it even tougher to get to the conference championship and try to build up. Some of the teams they have to play every year, it looks like it's going to be Appalachian State, Coastal Carolina, Marshall, and James Madison. While Georgia State, Georgia Southern might be a little bit easier to battle, that still puts them at about 4th or 5th best in their own division. And again, you've seen MMG's rebuild. Old Dominion is tough to do. And Old Dominion being in the state of Virginia really doesn't help them because they have 3 Power 5 opponents within breathing distance, being West Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Virginia themselves. Now, I know none of those teams are necessarily stellar, even though Virginia Tech might be good this year, but still, it makes for a tougher atmosphere and a tougher way to try to rebuild Old Dominion back up to the top. That's why they're number 3. Now, number 2, this is the team that I'm going to be using my first ever dynasty, and you can really flip 2 and 1 depending on what you want, but I just think 2 is worse because I think their offense looked a little bit worse. And that's going to be Ball State. The Ball State Cardinals in the state of Indiana, meaning you have to compete against all the big dogs in the Big Ten, being Ohio State, Michigan. You even have to compete against Notre Dame. Indiana is going to be a big one too because you're in the state of Indiana, so you're going to lose all the recruits to there at Purdue anyway, and Notre Dame's in Indiana, so you already have 3 teams in your own state that are either Power 5 or Notre Dame, just good teams in general. I mean, I know Purdue and Indiana aren't anything special, but it seems to me that this is going to be a tough rebuild to do with Ball State. The thing about Ball State that I know is that 3 of their top 7 players are just quarterbacks, which is what's going to make this even tougher because where is the skill around them? There might be 1 good wide receiver and a couple good defensive players, but I'm going to be starting as the offensive coordinator of Ball State, which is going to be tough. Ball State is in the MAC, and I believe they're the worst team in the MAC, and the MAC itself isn't that necessarily tough of a conference to win. You got the Akrons and the Buffaloes and whatnot to do, and Buffalo's going to be on a different list, being the worst teams, or at least the hardest to do in the 1.5 stars. But in a conference which usually ends up with 0 to 1 ranked teams a year, it's going to be a lot tougher to try to rebuild the worst team in that conference, who's not even going to go up against good competition anyway. I'm excited for the Ball State one, and if you want to see that full video about why I chose Ball State, it's going to be at the end of here probably. But with that being said, number 1 is going to be Kennesaw State. I said you'd see them earlier, and again, they are interchangeable, but I think Kennesaw State being in Georgia makes them way tougher, especially in some sense, being that you're going to have to recruit against Georgia, you're going to have to recruit against Georgia Tech, and all the other SEC schools that are also recruiting against Georgia, like Alabama, LSU, and whatnot. They're going to be competing against those Georgia recruits too. And then you've even got other teams like Georgia State, Georgia Southern, and that state as well. Now, the one thing that I did say that makes this a little bit easier is that their conference isn't necessarily that tough. Conference USA really only has one solid team, and that's Liberty. The rest of them don't really put up any effort. I mean, Western Kentucky usually has a good air raid attack. UTEP was good a couple years back. Middle Tennessee beat Miami once. And then there's Liberty and Louisiana Tech. But other than that, not a lot going on in that conference, which might make that a little bit easier. Now, again, those are just my opinions on the 5 toughest teams to rebuild in college football 25, especially these are just the 1-star programs, so don't get mad at me saying why isn't X, Y, and Z on here, because they're probably not a 1-star program. There's only 11 to choose from, and these were the 5 that I thought were the toughest. Now, as always, let me know down below if you think there's a tougher one or what you even think about my list, but with that being said, let's get this Ball State dynasty going, and most importantly, have a great day, and peace.